Hello, we're just letting people in. We've got around 70 people who are joining so far, and we've had over 100 register. So it might take a few minutes for the room to fill up a bit more, but thank you everyone for coming. Great, so we've got almost 80 people in the room now. I think we'll begin to make a start with a bit of housekeeping and things. I'll hand over to the chair, and then any people that are running a little bit late can come in as we start. So I'm pleased to introduce Sue Goodfellow, the Vice Chair of the Net Zero Task Force, who's going to be chairing for us today.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you very much indeed for joining us. We're really quite excited about this. It's part of our general consultation about how we collectively can tackle the climate change emergency that we have in Devon. This is the 5th webinar that we've held, and there are a few more to come, and we will tell you about those at the end. I've got a few housekeeping things that I need to tell you. The first is that we're recording this session, so please turn off your video if you don't want to be seen. So if you're eating your breakfast or whatever, turn off your video if you don't want us to see it. Please use the chat throughout. We will collate the questions and then we will feed them to our panel later on this morning. And please mute yourselves so that the sound quality is good for everybody. So I will just wait a second while people do that. And then I would like to introduce our panel. I'm Sue Goodfellow. I'm a member of the Net Zero Task Force, which will be explained later if it sounds very obscure. I'm also the chair of the Devon Wildlife Trust. And I'm joined today by some other members of the Net Zero Task Force, Gill Westcott, who is the co-chair of Transition Exeter and a director of New Prosperity Devon, Laura Cardenas, who's an atmospheric chemist at Roehampton Research Station, Lyndis, a former director at Land Use Consultants and an expert in land use planning, etc. Emily Reed, who's the project manager for the Devon Climate Emergency, Hannah Oliver, who's a communications lead for Devon Climate Emergency, and last but by no means least, we are delighted to have with us Mary Quicke, who is the managing director of Quicke Estates. And I have a quote from Mary which says, "There is a massive opportunity for farming to make a huge contribution to climate change." And I think that's what we're all about. And Mary is somebody who I think will really help us to do that. She's a celebrated icon of the dairy industry, and that's a quote from Farmer's Guardian. And she's her family have farmed for 14 generations or something, I think, near Newton St Sires. So Mary is a real force and influencer, and we're delighted to have her here. We also have, very fortunately, Paul Cottington, who is the environmental advisor for the NFU. And the NFU has been a very key partner in developing the Interim Devon Carbon Plan all the way along the line. They've just produced an ambitious plan that looks towards net zero for greenhouse gas emissions, obviously not just carbon, by 2040. And we're delighted to have Paul with us to both give us his own views and the views of the NFU. So without further ado, I think we're going to move now into a poll which will enable us to see who you are and you to see, you've obviously seen who we are. So Emily, can we have the poll up, please?
We can. Are you seeing the right slides? So I got a message saying that you were seeing the wrong end. Are the slides okay?
We can only see half the screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just got.
Okay. Sorry about this. I'm going to stop and share it again, and then I will launch the slides. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, sorry about that. So you should be able to see the poll now. So would you describe yourself as one of these following interested parties in food, land and sea? Would love to know who is in the room today.
Somebody has said no poll is visible, Emily.
It appears that quite a few people can see the poll because they're filling it out. So you might need to, if you're on a small screen, you might need to try and move your screen around a little. Okay, so one or two more people still filling in the poll, but that's almost everyone. So I'll give you a moment longer and then we will share the results.
I can see we've got a really nice broad audience. That's fantastic.
So you should be able to see the results now. Yeah, as Sue says, there's a great mixture in the room of people with different interests in food, land and sea. So we've got some farmers, lots of interested individuals, and quite a few people working in the environment and conservation sector. So we should have a good, interesting conversation today with lots of different questions from lots of different angles. Great, thank you very much.
It's also good to see people with an interest in the marine environment. I see.
Yes, so that's another important part of the plan. Brilliant.
Right. Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for doing that. And I apologise if you didn't have a category, but that's quite a good thing, really, not to have a category, but anyway. So we now move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is an introduction to the background of the Devon Climate Emergency, which Emily is going to take us through.
Thank you, Sue. So I wanted to introduce you to the Devon Climate Emergency Partnership first. So the overarching goal of the Climate Emergency Partnership is to create a resilient net zero carbon Devon where people and nature thrive. There's 3 further objectives of the partnership, and that is to reduce carbon emissions to net zero by 2050 at the latest. So net zero meaning that any emissions are balanced by the drawing down of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by things such as trees, and improve the resilience of Devon's environment, because we know that we are locked into a certain amount of continuing climate change, and therefore will increase have increased things like risks such as flooding that we need to improve our resilience to. And we also need to prepare communities for a warmer world for similar reasons. So the partnership is a broad group of individuals, including all local authorities in Devon, as well as Torbay and Plymouth, and public, private and community organisations, including some of the emergency response bodies and environmental and conservation organisations, and the National Farmers Union as well. So these organisations steer the project together, and the structure of the oversight of the project is a response group with CEO and director level involvement. So they're really the strategy setting body, and they're supported by a tactical group, which is comprised of officers and staff of the partner organisations. And this is a space for knowledge sharing and sharing of updates and progress. One of the first things that they did was to draw up a Devon Climate Declaration, which outlines the partnership's commitments to tackling the climate emergency and for the organisations themselves to take action, as well as the commitment to ask for the resources and national policy that is needed to facilitate the work. Then there is 2 work streams, one of mitigation, so emissions reduction, and that is headed by the Net Zero Task Force, which is a group of 15 volunteers with a wide range of expertise, and that's chaired by Patrick Devine-Wright, who's one of the authors of the UN International Panel on Climate Change reports, and the output of that we're discussing today, the Interim Devon Carbon Plan. And then there's an adaptation stream of work, so that's looking at climate impacts, and that's actually a regional working group, so it's working with Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly, as these issues are very regionally based, and that's chaired by Helen Dobby, who is from the Environment Agency, and the output of that will be a adaptation plan for Devon. So the Interim Devon Carbon Plan is a plan for everyone in Devon. It's not just a local authority plan, and it focuses on the strategic issues and nests with plans at other levels. So, for example, nests under national plans, and district and local organisational plans might give more detail as appropriate. So the plan has been based on evidence gathering, and there was a call for evidence asking for public submissions, and there was almost 900 responses to that, both from organisations and from individuals, as well as a youth parliament event, which 15 of Devon's schools attended, and roundtable thematic hearings with groups of experts in their fields contributing to what needs to happen to get Devon to net zero. So these have been gathered up and form the basis of the Interim Devon Carbon Plan that we've shared with you. We did hope to have held a citizens' assembly by this point prior to publishing a plan, but obviously, as you may have noticed, the pandemic has been quite disruptive. So we've gone ahead and published an Interim Devon Carbon Plan, which outlines the publicly acceptable ideas based on the evidence that we've already gathered, as well as highlighting the more controversial issues that need further input from a citizens' assembly. So the citizens' assembly is a group of individuals who will be invited to participate in discussing and deliberating on these more challenging issues. Individuals won't be able to volunteer themselves for it. They will be selected to represent the varied demographics of Devon. And following that, there will be a final Devon Carbon Plan. So the Interim Devon Carbon Plan sets out a date for net zero. So it describes what needs to be done to reach net zero by 2050 at the latest, and a trajectory to get there, and indicates the costs, opportunities and co-benefits of achieving net zero by 2050. But it does also indicate that this could be achieved potentially by 2040 and 2030, but that there are implications of this, for example, to do with cost and some implications of decarbonising ahead of the national target, which is 2050. So the date is something that we particularly would like your input on in the consultation. The plan is very clear that we cannot reach net zero within existing resources and policy, but the plan does indicate the broadly at a headline level the funding status of each action, most of which do need new resources, but some of which could be done within existing resources. There are significant opportunities to redirect existing purchasing power, such as where we buy our food. And the plan is also very explicit about the context of Devon's geography. We are a predominantly rural county, and that poses both opportunities and challenges, and some actions will be easier in our larger urban areas, and some will be easier in our rural areas. And so we've tried to imply where the actions might take place where they are more specific to rural or urban. Overall, the co-benefits of achieving net zero can be described, we think, as creating a fairer, healthier, more resilient and more prosperous society. And Lyndis from the task force will go on to describe in a bit more detail what the co-benefits are of achieving net zero within our food, land and sea sector. So,
over to Lyndis. Thank you very much, Emily. That's a quick whip really through the whole process that we're going through. So if anybody wants more detail on that, there is something about that in the carbon plan itself. So Lyndis, can you please take us now through the specific section on food, land and sea?
Yes, certainly. So the first point to make out is that agriculture, forestry and other land uses together provide or account for 17% of Devon's total greenhouse gas emissions in 2018, which is equivalent to 17%, the third largest source of emissions in Devon. These emissions include enteric fermentation in livestock, e.g. from cow's digestion, manures, inorganic fertilizers, changes in land cover, and the cultivation of soils. The figure of 17% does account for the contribution of Devon's terrestrial landscape in sequestering carbon dioxide, but not the role of the marine environment, which up until now has been somewhat underplayed. Next. Emily, next slide.
it should be with you now. Can you see that now?
Thank you. I'm now going to run through the sort of 5 priorities that the plan has identified for this under this theme. So the first is to maximize carbon sequestration and storage by natural carbon sinks. A carbon sink is a habitat which can absorb more carbon than it releases. And in Devon, we see the carbon sinks as being trees, woodlands, large peat reserves, particularly on Dartmoor, and other wetland habitats, of which there are a considerable range, such as the calm grasslands, but also reed beds, salt marshes, and the like. And of course, soils, which are a great carbon store. To assist with the with this idea of developing the carbon sinks, it's proposed to establish a land use framework, which would very much like your comments on what form this might take. And this would be underpinned by a nature recovery network, which would identify and promote opportunities for land use to simultaneously aid nature recovery, but also assist in climate change mitigation and adaptation. We're looking for multiple benefits from single actions. So a carbon store potentially also providing other benefits, and of course, critically, biodiversity. Next slide. This, of course, can't happen without funding. Now, the government has announced in the last budget, £640 million for under their Nature for Climate Fund. But as this is spread across the UK as a whole, this isn't really going to make a major indent in addressing Devon's carbon needs. So there are three particular proposals which are put forward in the plan. First of all, work with government on the Environmental Land Management Scheme, ELMS. Some people see ELMS as just another agri-environment scheme. It's much more than that. It's a complete change in agricultural policy. So under the CAP, farmers were paid for the area farmed. Now the monies that went into that are being transferred into the Environmental Land Management Scheme, which will pay farmers for benefits provided. And it's very much seen that those benefits will obviously include biodiversity, but also carbon storage and sequestration, and mitigation against climate change. The second opportunity of funding is biodiversity net gain initiatives. Under the Environment Act, there is a, sorry, I should say the Environment Bill, there is proposals that any development should see a 10% net gain in biodiversity value. That's a slightly odd term, but nonetheless, it is trying to increase the area and benefit of biodiversity. Now it's quite likely that some developments will not be able to provide for that increase in biodiversity on the development site itself, and therefore other lands will need to be sought, and this could include farmland. So in that case, developers would be paying for improvements for carbon and biodiversity on their land, sorry, on farmland. And then there is carbon offsetting. And in this case, the plan proposes potential development of carbon sequestration accreditation schemes locally, i.e. ensuring that the development of carbon sinks can provide what is needed and to the quality needed. And those are accredited. And secondly, creation of a Devon carbon, I'm slightly struggling here because the comments coming up are actually blocking the screen, but it doesn't matter. A Devon carbon investment platform, which can match those who wish to buy carbon credits with those who are providing the carbon projects. Next slide. The third major area of activity that the plan points to is a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions from farming practices and increased soil carbon. And in particular, it foresees enabling farmers and land managers to have access to impartial advice to help them transition profitably, I should say, towards a mix of regenerative agriculture and other forms of agriculture that are particularly focused on soil conservation and soil preservation, and also building soil carbon. But of course, it will also include development of other habitats and carbon sinks. Next slide, please. The fourth area that the plan focuses on is developing demand for and access to local, nutritious, sustainable and sustainably produced food through providing shared retail processing and marketing resources for Devon's food producers. Also offering programs to engage people with food and its production, including how their buying power, and this is a particularly important point, and I think one of interest to Mary, how their buying power can help determine the kind of farming we get. And then finally, the use of the spending power of Devon's anchor institutions, and by anchor institutions we mean schools, hospitals and other public institutions, how to use their buying power in food to support farming businesses to have a positive impact on the environment. Next slide. And finally, and very importantly, how to increase carbon sequestration and storage in coastal and marine habitats. Really, this has two parts, so there is a third, which I will just come to at the end. The first is protecting important marine ecosystems and their carbon sequestration and storage capacity to prevent blue carbon emissions arising from their loss and degradation. And secondly, it's measures to restore and enhance lost and damaged marine and coastal habitats such as seagrass beds and salt marshes to increase carbon sequestration and storage. Many of you will be very much aware of the very important role that these habitats play in carbon sequestration. It's been argued that seagrass beds, for example, are able to capture 35% more carbon than the tropical rainforests. So they are very important resources. The third point I was going to come on to is that what happens on the land very much affects what happens at, in our coastal waters, and therefore soils and pollutants entering rivers and then going out to sea and depositing along our coast smother these habitats and lead to their slow degradation and even destruction in some cases. So seeing the interrelationship between land and sea is very important. Next slide, please. So key outcomes from pursuing a net zero future. First of all, Devon's wildlife and landscapes, we would hope to see, are enriched by actions increasing the sequestration and storage of carbon. Second, actions to aid carbon sequestration and storage are located to aid adaptation to climate change, such as flood control measures and prevention of soil erosion. So again, we're looking at a situation where single actions hopefully are producing multiple benefits. Obviously carbon at the core in the case of this plan, but we would like to see these other benefits as well. People enjoying nutritious, healthy, high standard food sourced locally, which provides a carbon benefit. Rural businesses benefiting from a growing market for high quality, sustainable and non-food products, such as timber, and a new market in carbon offsets. And finally, Devon leading the UK in natural capital approaches and carbon offsetting standards for marine and the terrestrial habitats. Next slide. So, in summary, the transition to a net zero agricultural system and land use provides, we hope, numerous opportunities for Devon. We should see an enhancement of habitats with storing more carbon, requiring the quality and extent of habitats across Devon to be significantly improved. Increasing resilience with actions to enhance carbon sequestration, helping increase community resilience, such as tree planting or other habitat creation, reducing the risk of flooding and soil erosion. Next slide, please. The opportunities for improvement in health and well-being, eating well, much greater contact with nature, or the ability to have much greater contact with nature, revitalizing rural economies too, increasing demand for local sustainable food and other products, and opportunities in providing carbon offsetting. Okay, that's just a taster of what the plan covers in this area. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lyndis. That was really nice to run through that and to explain it a little bit more. And I would emphasise that this is an interim carbon plan, and it's a draft and it's out for consultation. So we really would welcome your comments on that. But now we're actually going to look at how that might pan out in Devon with Paul and Mary. And I'm going to ask Paul and Mary a few questions, and then we'll see where that discussion actually gets to. So we have something like 10 minutes to do that, I think. So the first question I would like to ask both to Paul and to Mary really is is what are the priorities? What are the most important things for helping farmers to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? And of course, this is not just carbon, but it's also methane and nitrous oxide, which are in some ways more toxic, if you like, than carbon. So first of all, Paul, would you like to tell us a little bit about what the NFU's priorities are for helping farmers in this area?
Thank you. Firstly, thank you for letting us come along and be part of all of this. You were really kind in giving us a quick heads up on this question. And so I've spent the last 30 minutes thinking, what are the priorities? And there's like a million. It's kind of, you go, oh my gosh, you got to do this, you got to do that, and blah, blah, blah. I mean, my standard answer would go to the NFU's net zero document, which has got 3 key priorities, which are around boosting productivity, which will in turn lead to reductions in emissions. So that's kind of the aggregation of smalls. And that can be everything from precision farming through to improving herd health. The second priority is around storage. So protecting some of our valuable habitats like our peatlands, but also improving how we use our soils in order to sequester more carbon. And then the third thing being around bioenergy and technology and kind of, smarter way of doing things. So there are kind of 3 standard priorities. And then whilst I was thinking through all of that, really, what is my priority in all of this? And I personally, I think it's really around making sure we get the language right and we're positive. Because my experiences with talking to the farming community is they've really embraced this whole agenda around net zero. It is a key thing that we're working on, and actually we've got to see farming as part of a solution and as an opportunity in order to do something for climate and net zero, and actually get the language right so people feel empowered and able to do something and want to do something and know how to do it. So a nice easy question on priorities, and you've got your standards, and in the end I think it's language for me.
Yeah, that's very interesting. There was somebody on the psychologist, I think, on the radio this morning about COVID. Hate to mention that, but he was saying actually it's much better to promote the people who are doing the good actions than blame the people who are doing the bad ones. Psychologically, you actually get better outcomes. So I think I quite agree with that. Mary, on your farm, what do you see as the biggest priorities for reducing greenhouse gas emissions?
I think it's interesting what Paul says, because absolutely there's that sense of the inspiration that I think Minette Batters, who leads the NFU, is providing, really giving people a sense, right, this is something we've got to be getting on with. And so for us, obviously there are things like making sure that there's no sort of waste in the system, the productivity thing, making sure that one of the things that we've been doing on the farm is moving from growing maize to feed our cows to growing grass clover to feed our cows, which reduces nitrogen, and really getting that importance of managing soils, because I think soils have been, historically have been seen as the thing that plants stand up in, as opposed to this huge resource. And I think it's really understanding, I'm noticing on the feed, the people say, well, why not just get rid of the animals? Well, on a farm like ours, and I would have thought for most farms in Devon, 100% arable is a really brutal thing for our soils and for biodiversity and for soil erosion. It's terrible. I know that those fields where we have done arable after arable after arable, the soil starts to go dead, it loses its ability to hold water. So it's really having people understand what the value of animal farming is in terms of providing upgrades to the soil. So very much, if you like, that regenerative farming to make sure that we've got a soil cover. And in a way, that's also, the things that we're also doing is informing our customers, informing our customers of the choices that they have, that the apparent choices of, highly processed vegan food, oh, that must be a good thing, might actually not be the best thing in terms of soil health. It might take more more soil organic matter from lands far away in the Americas, and actually what we should be interested in is getting those soils working well. And and of course, as Paul says, bioenergy, anything that we can do to replace fossil fuels throughout the whole of our system. It's trying to get that sort of system thing going, and it's absolutely about seeing all of those opportunities. I mean, for instance, we can use whey and send it away for biodigestion to collect that methane. So there's a tremendous number of opportunities, and then it's the freeboard thinking and the ability to invest to do all of those, invest and also change one's pattern of thinking. But the NFU, I think, are doing a fantastic job in assisting farmers to do that.
Thank you, Mary. That's really interesting. I wonder, Paul, if you could just tell us a little bit more about what farmers actually are doing, because there's quite a lot of comments coming in on the chat room about not having any meat and all this sort of stuff. But actually, farmers are doing a lot, and the sort of systems that we have in Devon are, although they contribute more to Devon's greenhouse gases than the national thing, that's because we've got so much farming in Devon. And I wondered if you could just comment a little bit on the sorts of actions that people are taking.
Do you know what? I think if you asked a farmer in general, what actions are you taking in order to do climate change, they'll probably scratch their head and go, I'm not entirely sure. But actually, all of the actions they're taking in terms of improving how their farm infrastructure is and how their land is functioning is all adding towards what it is to do climate change. So everything from repairing your gutters and improving the way you store water through to calibrating your fertilizer spreader all has a value towards what it is to do CO2 on the land. So I suppose kind of specific ones would be around precision farming. An awful lot of farms are using technology in order to make sure that they put their fertilizers and everything else and get the crops into exactly the right spot onto their land, having already done the analysis in terms of what the how the soil is, what nutrients are there. So in doing that, you reduce the amount of traffic you have. You also have then benefits in terms of reducing things like compaction, which can lead to erosion and pollution. You also reduce the amount of fertilizer you have, which obviously has some embedded energy in it. So yeah, things like that, and they're becoming standard practice. But I think, as Mary is saying, it's about, well, as you say, it's having that kind of positive language to make sure it all rolls out.
Yeah, thank you. And Mary, what do you see as the biggest opportunity for capturing and storing CO2 on your farm? And how do you see that linking to enhancing biodiversity? It's this whole thing really about multiple benefits.
I mean, it occurs to me that the whole of the support for agriculture, the support for agriculture over the last 30 years has been very much to have either permanent grass or you have arable, and while permanent grass can increase soil organic matter, you are having those losses on arable ground of soil organic matter, and I think it's getting those mixed farming systems back, the regenerative farming systems, and I think certainly the sort of measurement of that soil organic matter is something, having sensible tools where farmers could, farmers are desperately keen to get this to work. We get impacted by climate change really, weather changes and climate change really quickly. We're really, that's been the amazing thing about this NFU's call to net zero, is how positive people are. But it's giving people a targeted tool so that we know what we're doing, instead of just having a sort of general gallop in the general direction and hoping that some of that is correct. So it's all about having the tools. I'm probably not answering your question.
You know what? The tools bit though is I've written down for, as being a kind of a crucial barrier people, and it's one of the things we're looking at. We're doing a test and trial for the environmental land management scheme kind of pilots and stuff, and that's looking at what tools farmers could use, or, you know, because there's a myriad of tools you can use in order to do accounting, but which ones are right, you know, and actually which ones can you have confidence in, and actually getting those kind of, getting the right tools there in all sorts of ways, I think builds confidence and actually gets action on the ground. And that's kind of where we're at the moment, is getting the bits of software right, is getting the bits of technology right in order to go forward. And it, you know, it's part of what it is to have the fourth industrial revolution, isn't it? It's about how we merge these worlds a little bit. Farming will look almost exactly the same as it has been for ages, except in the background you've got a bunch of software operating, and, you know, your piece of nitrate or bit of nitrate or phosphate is going in exactly the right spot.
People talk about, oh yeah, well definitely you need to do tree planting. A key thing about trees is the planting's the really, really easy bit, and in order to get all of those multiple benefits that you're looking for, you actually have to do the looking after as well, which is, you know, for the next 30 years. So Devon County Council, we've had many trees, thank you Devon County Council, but actually a tree on its own doesn't, you know, a sapling on its own doesn't actually make the difference.
And there's also an issue about putting trees in the right place, isn't there, so that they do actually deliver those benefits for biodiversity and flood management, etc., rather than just being trees stuck on a hill or whatever it is. So yeah. So finally, sadly, we've got to move on, but final question really, what do you see as the biggest barriers in helping us to tackle climate change on farms? Mary, this first to you.
Well, I think it's, you know, obviously there's you know, farmers are going to be under acute commercial pressure as the support moves in other directions. So it's really working out how to balance that commercial pressure and you know, to work so the barrier is to be able to work out what the best way of approaching it is, because if people are just under commercial pressure, they may just take short-term decisions. So it's understanding how we can, the barriers, making these systems that work the best for us, and in a way that is about information. Can we get some reliable information? Can we get, as Paul was talking about, these reliable ways of measuring what we're up to? You know, and in terms of if we're creating sort of biodiversity, you know, is that, and it looks like the government wants that in part, biodiversity and carbon in part, to be funded by private organisations as well as public organisations. It's really not clear to, I think, farmers how we should go about that, and, you know, what it is we're being asked to do. So lots of information being required. I mean, I think there's the willingness to do it, and then there's the means and understanding of how to do it, are the barriers.
Yeah, that's all really interesting. Paul, what about yourself and barriers?
I mean, it's a difficult question. I mean, I kind of think it, you know, we tend to group farmers all up as this one homogenous kind of grouping of people who all do exactly the same kind of thing and look the same, and there's a massive variety in between, you know. So you got people who are lifestyle hobby kind of farmers, you've got people who have got you know, kind of large productive commercial units, you've got all of these you've got regenerative farmers, you've got organic farmers, you've got so many different sorts of farmers, all of which have a different driver. And I think, you know, the barriers is getting the language right for each one of those. As Mary was saying, you know, majority have to make it pay, is, you know, their businesses. And, you know, a bit of perspective on all of this is 16% of all farms currently make a loss, even with the support systems, the basic payment scheme coming in at the moment. If they didn't have that, another 42% would make a loss. These are fundamentally businesses that have to function in some way. So actually the barriers for me is probably making sure all of this builds into the farming model, so people can actually make it work as part of what they're trying to achieve on their farm. The other bits and pieces in terms of barriers are around things like making sure you get all of the knowledge from, you know, the likes of Northwick and Rothamsted and whatnot, all coming down onto farms, so you can do that improved husbandry, you can do that improved soil management, etc. There's lots of different bits and pieces.
Well, some really good hooks there. Thank you very much, Paul and Mary. You know, what you've said around information, knowledge, clarity of message, the communication, and how we actually measure it. I think they're all absolutely fundamental things. Most of them are in the interim carbon plan already, and we can flesh those out, and we can actually focus them a little bit more, I think. So thank you very much indeed for that. I really appreciate your contributions. So now we move into a general panel question and answer session, and I think Doug and Hannah have been actually signposting some of the questions and grouping them. So over to Doug, I think.
Yes, thank you, Sue. Hi, everybody. The questions have been coming in so quickly, I've been struggling to read them as they've been moving up the screen, but I've done my best. So what I'll do is I'll read out a question, then I'll suggest who I think on the panel would be best to answer them. So firstly, lots of discussion about paying farmers and how farmers are going to continue a livelihood from the transition to net zero. What's the role for the new environmental land management schemes in this transition? So perhaps, Paul, would you have some insights on that?
It will be fundamental. It's massively important. An awful lot of farms. I think up to a few years ago, 70% of the land in England was under an environmental scheme. And, you know, essentially that kind of shows that people were, one, farmers want to do those kind of things. Two, it's important to what it is to have as your business. With the fact that we have a new agriculture bill where, you know, the payments are for public goods, that means there has to be a transition from what was the original direct support system to something that can actually support a farm within this new ELM side. So it certainly, speaking to our membership, it is seen as one of the highest priorities, and it's also seen as a massive concern because we still don't know what it looks like, you know, and people like Mary have got to build a business based on something where they don't know quite what is going to be there. And I think that's my word for 2020, and it will probably be the same for 2021, but with probably a couple of pluses on it, is it's problematic.
Okay, thank you, Paul. One for Gill Westcott, I think. How can we ensure equity in the availability of locally sourced food?
Okay. I think that locally bought food directly, when it's bought from the producer, is not more expensive. So the Real Food Store produced a basket of food and found that it cost less than the equivalents in Tesco. The question is getting it directly. And I think there are two things I'd like to say. One is to improve the access of people to locally grown food directly from the farmer, or with easy marketing arrangements. So the whole business about accessible farmers markets in pleasant environments in the centre of cities and in places where people are is crucial. Supermarkets could help. We haven't involved them in the discussion, and we hope to do that. But the central markets, as in some continental towns, would be a fantastic benefit to Exeter. Places where people will go because they love being there as well as buying the produce. The other issue is the need for food hubs to support small producers to market their produce. And I think small producers are often using fewer chemical inputs and more labour. They produce a lot of the horticulture. So not all small farms are hobby farms. And there is a shortage of routes to new entrants to farming to acquire land or tenancies. And that is largely a matter of acquiring somewhere to live that they can afford. So there are planning issues in that, but there could also be support for food hubs to amalgamate the produce of small farmers and make them much more readily available to the markets at a reasonable cost. That's not to say there isn't need for other measures on equality generally to enable people to afford it. Food poverty is an outrage in this day and age, and people in food poverty shouldn't have to eat waste food or food that is produced at a huge cost to planet and all our futures. So those are a couple of ideas.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Gill. I should say that all of the questions and comments that are in the chat will be taken as part of the consultation evidence for the next phase of the plan. Emily, I think we've probably got one for you. What does the plan say about wider environmental management, particularly, for example, rivers and coasts?
Great, thank you. Well, Lyndis did allude to it earlier, that in a number of places in the plan we have indicated the importance of what happens on land and in people's houses and gardens, and their awareness of that, for what happens in our rivers and down on the coast. So as Mary also spoke about, the way that you manage your land will impact very heavily on levels of soil erosion. And I can see on the estuary near me how much it's been raining by how red or not the river is, with soil running down. So they're very closely linked, and there are a number of actions outlining the need to look at a whole catchment approach. So looking at what's happening on the land and how that influences the rivers and the coast, and we highlight the importance of blue carbon, so things like seagrasses and salt marshes, which are very much impacted by land management and the things happening further up the catchment.
Great, thank you, Emily. Right, we've had quite a few questions about the role of livestock in the future. And I know Laura, would you like to come in now and just provide some comments on that?
Thank you, Doug. So I guess the main thing about this discussion is we have focused on looking at the diet and achieving a balanced diet. The extreme scenario where you remove the animals completely needs to be argued against what that is going to be replaced with. In terms of replacing with arable crops means that more fertilizer needs to be applied to soil, producing nitrous oxide emissions, which are more damaging than methane, but also the fact that they cannot be replaced 1-to-1. So a hectare that supports animals is not equivalent to a hectare of an arable crop. So the nutrients content of livestock compared to an arable crop needs to also be considered, as well as the organic matter contribution from livestock to soil. So removing animals means recovering organic matter is not a trivial activity. And then obviously, finally, the use of soil needs to be optimized. So the best soil and the best location for the best crop. So we are more efficient.
Great, thank you, Laura. Mary, potentially one for you. If not, feel free to pass it on to somebody else on the panel. The question is, could the supermarkets be pushed to promote more locally produced food? So I'm wondering, what have your experiences been with engaging with the volume food resellers?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're sort of, in theory, interested in local food. It's actually, it's something that they tend to have little teams that operate, and they can be a very useful way for people to get hold of local food, and that's obviously really to be encouraged, and can be a very useful way for little, for small farmers for small food producers to start moving into that. But it often is, it's often easier not to supply them, but it's, they supply 80% of the nation's food, or 80+% of the nation's food. So obviously anything that they do has an enormous impact on our food system.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Mary, thank you. Perhaps the last question, because I'm conscious that time's ticking on, to Paul. If we do improve environmental standards further in Devon, perhaps even the UK, what's the risk of imports from elsewhere that have lower environmental standards?
It's about as meaty a question as you can get for the last one. I mean, all of that is absolutely intertwined with what it is for us to have our different trade deals, what it is for us to have our different non-tariff barriers and everything else. I mean, the thing that we're very proud of as a nation, and certainly within our sector, is we're very proud of the high standards that we operate to. And, you know, we don't want to be shifting from all of that. And it's there is always this risk that if you have those high standards and, you know, there's somewhere else you can get it more cheaply and bring it in, then you do conservation swapping. I suppose it is there, but it's it goes back in some ways to your last question around what it is to do local foods, which is one of provenance. And actually it's being proud of what we produce here in this country, and to actually sell that as a proper brand. So it's doing it at all scales, whether it's doing it at a national scale with those standards, or doing it, say, at a Southwest where we've got West Country beef and lamb, which is, you know, has a standard around what it is to do grass-fed, all the way through to something that is very locally produced. I mean, the direct answer to your question, I don't know. But the only way we can really kind of counter it is by encouraging people to go for what is best.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thank you, Paul. Let's leave the questions there. As I say, we will record all of them into the consultation responses. Back to you, Sue.
Okay, thank you very much, Doug, and thank you all very much indeed, both the people who asked the questions and the people who answered them. It's a big topic that we've covered this morning, and I think one of the things that's come through is that there needs to be an absolute menu of actions that we can all take in different ways at different times. There is no simple solution, but there are solutions, and you've helped us to find our way through that. So thank you very much indeed. I think Hannah was going to say something about the next steps.
Yes, thank you, Sue. So the next steps are to view the plan. You can view it online, you can download PDFs of each chapter, and read as much as you wish. The summary is a good place to start. And then go on and complete the consultation. Give us your feedback. You can skip through the consultation. For example, if you only wanted to answer questions on food, land and sea, then you can skip through the other sections and just give your feedback on this section. And then share the consultation within your networks. The more people that give their feedback and are aware of the plan, the better the final plan will represent Devon, and the better response that we can get from this. And then finally, if we go on to the next slide, you can see the upcoming webinars. Next one is community groups on the 19th of January. And if you want to watch any of the previous webinars, they are available on our YouTube channel. Just search Interim Devon Carbon Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you again, all of you, very much indeed. It's been a really interesting session, and I think it's the start of all sorts of things. So do please comment. It's a plan for everybody. I can't emphasize that more. It's not a Devon County Council plan. It's a plan for everybody who cares about Devon and who cares about Devon's future. So thank you very much. Contribute where you can, and let's look forward to the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you everyone, and please do fill out the consultation.
Okay, bye everyone.